Hello and welcome to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. Thank you very much for joining us. And welcome to day 3 of the Cambridge Live experience and to this particular session on how to nurture independent learners through pedagogic partnerships. My name is Eric Baber and I'm the Director of Professional Learning and Development here at Cambridge University Press. I'm delighted to welcome our speaker in a moment. Just before I do that, I'd just like to mention that you're very welcome to post questions or comments in the chat window during the presentation, and I will relay those questions to the speaker after the session. And so I'd very much like to welcome Harry Kuchah Kuchah. Harry is a lecturer in language education at the University of Leeds. He has also been involved in a range of teacher education and materials development initiatives in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Europe. More recently, he has served as a consultant with the Council of Europe in Albania, with Windle Trust International in South Sudan, and with the British Council in Afghanistan, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, and Senegal. Harry was recognized as one of TESOL International Association's 30 upcoming leaders in ELT globally in 2016. He is currently president of IATEFL, the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, joint coordinator of the Teaching English in Large Classes International Network, and member of the British Council English Language Advisory Group. His research interests include teaching English to young learners, English medium education, language teacher education, and context-appropriate pedagogies, and he has published widely in these areas. Harry, thank you very much for joining, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that rather undeserved introduction. And it's a pleasure to be speaking at the Cambridge Live Experience event. I've followed some of the sessions over the last 2 days, and I've really enjoyed and learned a lot from different experts in different areas of our field. I was invited and I did agree to talk about independence, the independence of our learners through pedagogic partnerships. Very often, the work I do, I've done as a teacher, and also the kind of research I do tends to be situated within learner autonomy. But my life as a practitioner in Cameroon didn't involve any understanding of what, or even any awareness that there was a concept such as learner autonomy. And so I was just like many of my colleagues across sub-Saharan Africa, engaging in pragmatic ways of solving the challenges that occurred in my very large classroom and classrooms with no resources, with children from very poor homes. So my background and the context in which I work and research is that kind of context, which is often resourced, which is very detached from the elegance of Western concepts of what would constitute best practice. It's often detached from the hype about technological advancements and things like that. And these are my colleagues, and the children we teach in these classes are often children who can't afford, who can't even dream of having access to those resources that are very popular in mainstream discourses of ELT at the moment. So if you are from a more privileged, and this is a very relative terminology, working context, I am hoping that some of the ideas raised in this discussion would inspire you to think differently about not just privilege or being underprivileged, but how to use the learners in your classroom to achieve a lot more with the resources that you currently have or do not have. The pandemic has no doubt changed lots of things, and I've been speaking to hundreds of colleagues across sub-Saharan Africa, but also in the global south through the TELC network, and listening to the different ways in which teachers are trying to address the situation. And one thing has come up consistently, it's been the idea of shifting to technology. But the point is that technology, personally, I know that technology does not teach. Human beings do, teachers do. So transferring a pedagogy of dependence from the classroom face-to-face context into an online platform doesn't solve the problem of education. Like every other aspect of life, maybe in politics and where we've used up the resources available to us in creating, for example, arms to fight each other, rather than thinking of the real issues that matter. And I think the COVID pandemic has shown us how fragile our health systems and education systems are, and how we've wasted time strengthening sectors that are probably not too relevant to our well-being, one of which is war. In terms of education, there's been a wave of changes and ministries have been doing lots of different things. But at the center of all of this has been teachers trying their very best, sometimes abandoned to themselves, trying to find ways of supporting their students. And so what I want to talk about today is something that we might want to consider when we go back to normal, in the hope that we can probably reflect on our pedagogies in such a way as to make a difference if the world gets into the crisis we have at the moment. Because imagine that we stopped teaching for a while and encouraged learning more, where would our children be at this particular time? I would respond to this question much later. But for now, I just want to say my work has mainly been around contexts like this, working with very young learners in UK context very briefly, but mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, but also supporting young learner teachers, as in this example, generating local resources in contexts where there are no resources, but also helping teachers through my work with ELT consultants in using what is available to them. For example, in contexts where children have no books, how can we produce local rulers, and how can we help them read and write on the surfaces that are available to them, especially where there is no chalkboard. And as in this example in South Sudan, teachers have gone ahead to use that expertise to support literacy around the playground, where children feel more comfortable in learning and being supported. In these kinds of contexts and elsewhere, I guess, the focus of teaching has for a long time, and I guess the focus of teacher development or teacher education has for a long time focused on the best theories. What are the theories that we can use? What are the best teaching methods and techniques that we can use? What materials can we use to encourage learning? What is the curriculum? What is the syllabus? What are the classroom conditions? What are the technological resources that we have at our disposal? But very often in our teacher education, we always forget about the learner. And as the saying goes, you can teach till thy kingdom come. If students don't want to learn, they would not learn. You can drag a horse to the river, but you can't force it to drink water. So sometimes what this means is that possibly not, and we know that not all teaching leads to learning, but all learning leads to learning in some way. So in this business of teaching and learning, we might want to consider the learners as the kings and queens of learning, because there is no better expert in learning than the learners themselves. So how can we tap into their expertise of learning so that our teaching is relevant to them? That is what I want to explore today very briefly over the next couple of minutes. Now, this is from my research, from my interaction with young learners, 11-year-old children in primary schools in Cameroon. This was part of my PhD research, where I was investigating, and that was so many years ago, investigating context-appropriate pedagogy. And for the children, I was looking at what counted as good English language teaching. And so the process involved observing classes and observing with the children, of course, observing them in class as the teachers taught, but also looking at their exercise books and asking them to identify the best lesson for that term and using that as a basis for generating their ideas of what might constitute a very good lesson from the teaching and learning perspectives. Of course, there were also other child-friendly activities like simulating their teachers and showing what they would do otherwise. In this example, I asked the children to show me their best lessons, and most of them showed the lessons in which the practice activity at the end was good, so they scored a high mark. But one of them showed me a lesson in which they scored a 0 in the practice activity. And when I asked why that was their best lesson, the answer was that, well, this is because the teacher, I had a 0 because I didn't understand. The teacher did not tell me clearly what to do. But then after that, I talked to my friend, and my friend explained what I was supposed to do. And now I know I understand the lesson very well, and I can do the activity better. So somehow from this example, we know that the students support each other already. So in our classroom, and I'm drawing from Monica Poulter's talk on differentiation yesterday, which I really loved. Thank you very much, Monica, if you're listening, that in our classroom, we have colleagues in our classroom. They are teachers amongst our students, and we can tap into them to help develop learning even more in the classroom. And so the child here explains that they knew better because of their friend. That's a second example. In this example, we're talking about a lesson they had just been through and had observed the lesson, and we're talking about what was interesting and what was not interesting about the lesson, and why they were active or not active at different points of the lesson. And Jemia here is saying the story was not even interesting. If the teacher asked us, we would have written a better story. Now, this is a story from the textbook, and the children are saying it was a boring lesson because the story itself was not interesting. If the teacher had asked us, we would have written a better one. And then I go on to ask them a couple of questions. And at the end, they're saying, well, if you like it, give us a topic and we'll write a very interesting story, which would be better than the one in the textbook. So these things all push me to start thinking about putting into perspective some of the assumptions that we have and questioning some of the things we do implicitly in our own practices. Is the teacher the only important actor? And this is not just in the rhetoric. In fact, in the things we do we consider ourselves as the only important actors? Are good methods and materials enough to produce good learning? What exactly should a teacher's role be, and what should a learner's role be in a language learning classroom? And this takes me back to my own experiences of teaching in high school, in secondary school in Cameroon. And one of my very first schools was this one in the far north regional capital of Cameroon with 2,300 students. And in this school, I had the responsibility of teaching slightly above 600 children through 5 different classes. And in one of the classrooms, which I've written about and spoken about extensively, I had 232 teenagers. That was how my classroom looked like, very crowded. The classroom was built to take 80 students. And many of my students were very motivated, and that's a privilege many teachers don't have, to have very motivated students in a French-speaking part of the country, which is very multilingual. I had students eager enough, motivated enough to stand by the window and try to learn English. And in that kind of context, it was so difficult to engage in interactive activities as I had learned in my training. So some of the theories and ideas that I had learned from my training as a teacher just proved to be irrelevant because it was so difficult to work in this kind of context where there was barely space for the teacher to turn around and face the students without having to wipe part of the board with my shirt. And so like every young teacher at that time, I engaged in teaching the basic grammar and vocabulary and giving them practice exercises and asking them to exchange their textbooks and mark each other's work based on the responses that we all generated. But the result of this was that my students grew, they were really good at grammar, but they could not say anything meaningful. So for example, one of my students who wanted to show me how much grammar and vocabulary they had learned met me and told me, oh, please, sir, I was flabbergasted to esteem an impetus for a fortnight, however, my teacher. These were vocabulary items I had taught them in trying to make them learn high-sounding language so they could sound like English speakers, but it didn't add up to good grammar or good sentences or conveying any meaning. Other examples that I got from my students included things like this one, when I asked them to write a short composition. So I had taught them discourse markers that we use in writing argumentative essays. And I asked them to write a short paragraph on the topic, which is better, monogamy or polygamy, because this is a highly polygamous context in the north of Cameroon. And this is an example for my students. I think that monogamy is better than polygamy. However, some men marry more than one wife. Thus, they can be as happy as a king. Therefore, they should marry many wives. Nevertheless, it is good to marry one wife. Consequently, you will be happier. Now, individually, these sentences are all grammatically correct and they all mean something. And they are using discourse markers that the teacher taught them excellently. They were depending on what I taught them and they were using that excellently in individual sentences, but they were not producing discourse as would be used in normal communication in life. And so the text together doesn't quite make sense. And this is the consequence of focusing a lot on teaching rather than on learning. So they were learning grammar, but they were not learning language in the full sense of the word. So over a number of processes, I started renegotiating with my learners to find better ways of dealing with the large classroom, the context in which we were working, but also better ways of making language learning relevant to them. And this involved negotiating with them about defining our common goals, what we wanted to achieve through language, not beyond just the exams, and how we would achieve that in a context where not all my students, in fact, in this classroom, there were about 19 textbooks in a classroom of more than 200 students. And so we needed to start thinking collectively about how we would find the resources, since we could not rely on the textbooks, and relying just on the teacher wasn't producing any results. And that is the beginning of my journey towards what I call a pedagogy of partnership, actually thinking solutions out with my own students and recognizing that for any learning to happen, we need to mutually construct that together. And so through a number of processes, we agreed on moving outside the classroom and working in groups. We also agreed that we were going to look for resources. Everyone, it was going to be a collective responsibility. And so my students, like me, were looking out for resources that we could use in the classroom. Now, this has been written up in an article that is freely available online. So I would cut the story short. You can download this article through a Google search and you can read the story. But what resulted from this partnership of working outside the classroom, of individual students going out there looking for resources, was that they all came to me with something they had found out. And together we talked about the results that they had found, and also talked about how we could use that in the classroom. So my students became partners, not just in finding the resources, but also thinking through the activities that we could use in the classroom, because they know better than me. They knew better than me what activities would be interesting to them. And so relying on them for ideas about that helped me. And my job was just to use those activities that they had proposed and also try to tailor the lesson to fit curriculum requirements. So examples of things that my students found were things like this a piece from Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream. And we used these to generate lots of activities. So there were songs, they wrote their own dream poems. They wrote songs about issues in their local environment. So topics like racial discrimination, tribalism, topics like gender discrimination, topics as basic as even youth, what is that, delinquency, juvenile delinquency, or even things like making noise in class. They all had to write their own in their groups. They generated their own dream poems, or wrote a song, or drew a picture which they talked about in relation, or wrote a story that reflected an issue in their environment for which they had a dream. So this is an example of a group that wrote a poem following Martin Luther King's example on tribalism. Right, I'll give you a second or 30 seconds to read this so I can move on. And this is an example of a song that my student brought to me one day. She runs up to me to say, oh, I can also do it. I have wrote a poem, a song. Oh, what have you written? But through a conversation, this is the text. This is just an excerpt from the text that she showed me. It turns out that she had actually listened to Michael Jackson's Heal the World and had written a song following Michael Jackson's tune that fitted into the context. And if you can sing, maybe you can try this one with me. Come today, join our English class. In order to be bilingual in the future, there is only one way, just to be a good Cameroonian. Make a better choice and join us today. Sorry, my voice isn't the best, but I hope I delivered it. So those were examples, and I just wanted us to come back to Lydia, our 11-year-old group, Lydia and her friends. And remember, Lydia is the one who said, if the teacher had given us the story, we would have written it better. So as part of my promise to them when I was negotiating access to my research, I had promised that I was going to teach them a lesson. They asked me, are you going to teach us one lesson? We would participate in your research as long as you would teach us a lesson. So I went back to teach them a reading lesson, and I used this text that came from Christine Nuttall's book on teaching reading. So this text is about, the names have been adapted here to fit local names. So this text came from the textbook. It was used in the local textbook. And what we did was that I gave them the first part of the story, just the first paragraph, and asked the children to complete the story. And in their groups, they wrote different stories. And at the end, we compared their stories to the original story. So this is the original story. And as you look at this, I would like to read one of the stories from a group of 11-year-old children, so you can compare the two texts. So this one reads as follows. Last week, Atangana's wife, so this is the one I'm reading from the student scripts, which I have not shared. Atangana's wife, Leila, had an accident. Atangana's youngest child, Junior, was at home when it happened. He was playing with his new toy car. Atangana had given it to him the week before for his 3rd birthday. That morning, Atangana left early to go to work in his office at Carrefour Bastos. He was very beautifully dressed, and he took his bag and went to the parlor door. As he was going out, his wife said, "Goodbye, my dear husband." He kissed his wife, Leila, and said, "Goodbye, my lovely wife." Now, Leila went to the kitchen to cook some food for his family. She wanted to cook plantain and dole and fish. So she piled, that's the word they used, the plantain and put it in the fire. She also prepared the fish, cut it into small slices, and started to fry it. Then her telephone rang, and as she was running to pick it up, she hit her foot on a pot on the floor. As she was falling, her kaba pulled the frying pan, and it fell on her, and the oil started to burn her. She was crying and shouting, "Come and help me, come and help me." Junior was playing with his new toy car with his friends in the garden when he heard his mother shouting, "Help, help." He did not want to play again. He told his friends, "Listen, that is my mother shouting. Let us go and help her." But his friends were only playing and playing. So he left his bad friends in the garden and ran to save his mother. As he heard his mother crying and calling for help, he went and saw his mother on the floor. He came and saw his mother and started crying too and calling for help. He shouted so much that the neighbors heard him and started coming. Suddenly, they asked, "What is happening?" But Junior didn't know what to say. The neighbors took her to the hospital. Junior went with them. 1 minute passed and the doctor injected her. She slept after. When she got up, she saw people around her. Her husband came and embraced her and told her, "I love you. You will be well soon." When she became well, the doctor said she can go home. When they went home, Atangana organized a small festival for his wife, Leila, because she was alive and well. Atangana was very proud of his son for what he had done. He also thanked the neighbors for what they did to his wife by taking her to hospital so that she could not die. He gave them presents. Leila was very happy with the neighbors for saving her life. So was also happy his very good son, Junior. So this is a more complex story that the children were able to write. And if you compare the complexity of the children's story with the simplicity of the text that was provided in the textbook, you see just how much we can gain from engaging children as material developers for their own learning. And the stories that these children used were then used in other classes to generate learning, because remember, in this context, there are no resources. So children's resources then helped to generate learning in other classes. Now, apart from just writing the stories, the children also engaged in writing comprehension questions. Now, on the 2 columns on the screen, you would find questions that came from the textbook and questions that came from the children. Now, could you just type whether which of these you think came from the textbook and which of them came from the children? So say blue equals to textbook or blue children, and black textbook or black children. If you can just type that into the box. Which of these sets of questions you think could have been set by the children and which by the textbook? Right, okay. I must say that I have edited the language so that it doesn't give it. They weren't written like this. I've actually edited them. Now, I just want us to analyze with Bloom's taxonomy at the back of our minds, just look at these questions. Some of them are very basic. For example, when did Leila have an accident? That was last week, we know. So they are surface level questions. What was Junior doing when the accident happened? That's surface level, we know. The information is straight. How old was him? Maybe we reflect on that. How many children had Atangana? Which people were in Atangana's house, etc. These are very surface level questions, and those were the questions that were in the textbook. The questions in black are a bit more engaging. So questions like, do you think Junior did the correct thing? If you were in Junior's place, what would you have done? This demand a bit more thinking and reflection and generate a lot more discussions. These were questions that were asked by the children. So these are the comprehension questions then in black that we used when we went to work with children in other classrooms using these materials. Other things they did were drawing pictures, and again, Monica talked about differentiation and the different talents in the classrooms. Some of them they drew pictures to visualize, to kind of capture the story in the form of pictures. And we use these pictures to ask other children to work from the pictures to write either a story or a factual text. And this is an example of a text that was written on the basis of this picture, which captured a child's understanding or a summary of the story of Atangana and Junior and his wife Leila. So here they are talking about the importance of a hospital. And you could see from an analysis of the different pictures that the children drew, told us something about what the children's motivation for learning language was, what their future prospects were, what they were thinking of becoming. So this is an example of a child who captured just the medical scene, the hospital scene, and you can tell that they either have parents who are medical practitioners or they have an ambition or that has been nurtured by their parents to start thinking about becoming working in the field of medicine in the future. We can imagine those things, and that in itself helps us think about ways of supporting them. So these examples are just to show you that the children in our classroom can themselves become material developers. They can themselves become partners in thinking through the process of teaching and learning and the activities. And if we don't give them the opportunity, we would not be able to see those potentials. Now, I would jump this because we don't have a lot of time. I have just a few minutes to stop. But I've also had experiences with the Parental research group where teachers have partnered with each other, but also with children to transform their pedagogy from a purely chalk and talk pedagogy to a more engaging platform where children decide about the topics they want to talk about, they want to write about, the tasks they want to achieve in the classroom, and they produce those tasks together, but also support their tasks by, support their text with pedagogic materials and resources that can be used to enhance teaching and learning in their classroom. More recently, and this I am getting to the end, I have been following what is happening in Cameroon, for example, and more teachers trying to fight the pandemic, to go work their way around the pandemic in supporting their learners, have had their learners doing amazing things through WhatsApp. So my colleague Abigail here from Cameroon, and she would be speaking at an IATFO web conference in October about her work. So I would invite you to sign up for that when the time comes, has been showing how children are able to use the emojis on WhatsApp to develop creative ideas. So they are actually themselves exploring their parents' phones and using WhatsApp as a resource to WhatsApp emoticons and emojis as a resource for generating activities and challenge and tasks for their peers. And this teacher works with them, not just in groups, as in WhatsApp group, which we are familiar with, but she's got a way of working through WhatsApp broadcasts so that the learning is targeted to particular learners, and she's exploring their individual skills. So the thing I want to conclude with that, just to pull my thoughts together, is that we can think about our job as teachers beyond just teaching. We can think about our job, and this has been said over and over, as facilitators of learning, so that when there is a lockdown like we have had, learning can continue without us. I spoke to a colleague in Benin who actually went into teaching via WhatsApp, not because he wanted to, but because his students got to him to say, well, we have been doing this, can you check this? We want you to give us some work to do. Can you help us? Can you give us something to do? If we can bring our students to a point, if we can support our students to a point where they are actively doing things and asking us to check, they're actively producing and thinking of themselves as partners in the process, then we would be supporting them. After all, a language is learned rather than taught, and too much teaching sometimes can be an obstacle. We need to give them space to learn. And a good part of our job is to help them to learn rather than just teaching them. And it is realizing this that can help us see our role and see our students as partners in all aspects of lesson planning, delivery, and evaluation. Of course, involving them helps to motivate and empower them and brings out authenticity in the classroom, because the texts they write are authentic to their own reality. And that enhances their creativity and learner agency, but also helps us see how they are progressing, where their particular challenges are, and how we can support them. And this is my last slide. We need to think about transitioning from a pedagogy of dependence to a pedagogy of autonomy. By this I mean, and when Flavia Vieira used pedagogy of dependence to talk about the fact that sometimes even teachers who want to promote autonomy act in ways that actually are dependent, promote children dependence on them, are entirely built on dependence on the teacher. We need to think carefully when we teach. Are we promoting autonomy? Are we helping our students to think on their own? Or are we helping them to think only in relation to what we are asking them to think about? Are we helping them to be autonomous learners? This transition to me constitutes an essential component of making our learners partners in the teaching learning process, so that without us, they would continue to learn long after they have left the classroom. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Harry. Lots and lots of really enthusiastic messages in the chat window. You are clearly an inspiration to many of us. So thank you very much. We've got quite a few questions here, which I'll relay to you. Here's a question from Zena Al-Shar. What is the suitable age and stage or cycle for being independent learners? Good question. At what age? Oh yeah, the question says it.
Okay. I think it's David Little, if I'm not mistaken, writing about autonomy, and in his conceptualization of autonomy said, individuals, human beings are generally autonomous, but we are also social beings. So autonomy is not independence, it is actually interdependence. And there is really no age. If we consider that children at a very young age tend to cry if they hate something, we don't tell them to cry if they hate something. They decide on their own that they don't like it. They decide whether they want to eat the food we give them or not. So that shows that they do have some agency over their life. What happens is that this agency is then destroyed by the school and by the society. So we tend to tell children, don't speak when adults are speaking. This is wrong, this is right. We don't tell them, well, this is how you should speak when adults are speaking. So in the context where I come from, the rule is don't speak when adults are speaking. Don't answer back at adults. We don't invest in helping them to know the best way to answer back. So we shut down their creativity because of the don'ts. But there are alternatives to this, and the school can help in supporting children to find a way of expressing themselves in ways that are acceptable within the society rather than shutting them down. So there is really no right age. If we stifle them when they are young, when they go to secondary school, we, the same teachers, start complaining that, oh, these students don't have a sense of agency, they are not autonomous. Autonomy is nurtured and developed and supported. And it is not only in what we tell them, it is in the way in which we interact with them. So a lot of this actually lies in our attitudes as teachers towards our learners. What is the way in which we are teaching? What is the message? What is the subtext in the way we are teaching? So I would say there's really no age. As early as possible helps children to understand that they are important in society and that their ideas matter. Even if their ideas are baffling and puzzling, we can always help them to work a way through that. After all, even as adults, when we protest, we don't have all the answers. But of course, we are happy that we protested and someone's listened to us. Children too are.
Super, thank you. And that actually leads on to another question or comment by Joanna Jakubowska. She says, I teach adults and I'm trying to step back and shift the focus onto my students to encourage them to do work of their own and to limit teacher talking time. However, they seem to feel that I'm not being useful or doing any work when I don't hover over them. Do you have any advice for Joanna?
Yeah, I think that's pretty common. That's very common. I've been in contexts where, and that's in the UK, where parents want to see notes that children copied. And if they didn't copy anything in their notebooks and they didn't have some activity and then with a mark, then they think that they were not learning. But that's the unfortunate thing about formal education. The message we've given out to society about formal education and how it's structured is actually what is chasing us. And in many cases, the idea about parental involvement has often been translated in ways that do not actually help parents and teachers work together to understand learning, because parents themselves need some education, but adults, coming to adults, what happens is that's the result of what's happened before. So they've not suddenly got to that point, they've started elsewhere. Secondly, maybe it's worth exploring from the beginning why they are on a program, what they want to achieve out of that program, what the best things would be for them, what they think would be the best resources to help them, so that in a sense, they are contributing in the thinking up process. One of the things that I've done with my MA level students in the UK over the years is that at the beginning of the year, we all set our expectations and they have a clear idea of the curriculum content. And then they have an opportunity to suggest things that they would want to see. And we discuss this together, and I tell them what I would be able to provide and what I would not be able to provide, because not every request is possible. But when we engage in this dialogue and students understand that this would be possible, this will not be possible, and that the teacher is making an effort to listen to them while at the same time generating his or her own content to fit curriculum requirements, that begins the process of dialogue. Just sitting back and giving them work to do is not enough, because that in itself is teacher dependence. So they are actually depending on you to give them something to do, and they're going to think you're lazy. That actually has to be a joint up process, which begins from the very beginning, setting expectations for the teacher and also your expectations for them, and agreeing on those as best as possible. And as you progress, shifting towards giving them more autonomy and reviewing that with them, of course.
Okay, super, thank you. Very interesting question from Laura Henzen. Do you think that students in less privileged areas are more motivated and more eager to learn than the ones in privileged areas?
Well, I wouldn't say so. Motivation is not, yeah, there is some truth to that. In my context, for example, education is the surest way to achieving a kind of a good life in the future. And so parents are very eager for their children to go to school. They don't have opportunities for apprenticeship like you would have in the UK, where people can learn a trade very quickly. So yeah, they're probably motivated to go to school, but whether they are motivated to learn English or not is another thing, because they can survive. In this context I described, they can survive without English. However, motivation is something that is both intrinsic and sometimes built by the teacher. And in many ways, we can set a platform for developing learner motivation by making them feel valued. And again, I'm coming back to what Monica said yesterday. Personalizing language is far more important than the grammar and vocabulary that we teach them from the textbook. If they can't use language in a way that makes sense to their own experiences in life, then they would never be motivated, whether they are in a low resource context, in an underprivileged or in a privileged context. So I think the essential thing is not the context in which they are, but it's the linguistic context in which they are functioning. And by linguistic context, I mean how the teacher is helping them use language in a way that makes sense to them, and not just in a way that makes sense to the teacher. Otherwise, they would end up with the kind of grammar that are presented at the beginning of this book, of this presentation, and that doesn't really help them. But if they can talk about their personal lives, their interests, if they can write their love songs and love letters and poems, and say things about, talk about their history, their family, talk about their culture, then that motivates them, because they're talking about something they really know. So let's not give them two tasks, the task of developing language and the task of developing content. At least if we build on content they already know, which is personal to them, then that motivates them to learn the language.
Super, thank you very much. Harry, we could listen to you all day. The comments in the chat window just keep coming, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. But thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experiences, Harry. It's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you to all of you in the audience. Hope you've enjoyed it. Oh, I know you have. I've been keeping my eye on the chat window. Thank you so much, Harry. Have a great rest of the day, and speak to you again soon.
And thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, I couldn't see the comments, but thank you all for for attending this session, and goodbye.
Thanks, Harry. Bye-bye.